I'm going to partner up with Troy Lambert here. We are going to do what's called Pros Talking Pros, and we are going to take the industry professional outlook and we're going to actually apply several filters here. And today you're going to see my filter as a newbie to this industry, what's becoming a norm, which is the AI and how it's affecting the publishing industry and authors' lives and the work as a whole. So what we're going to talk about today is artificial intelligence and its impact on our industry and how you can use it as a tool. Am I correct, Troy, in this?
Yes.
And then we'll talk a little bit about what and how to apply this to your business models as a lifetime author. So one of the things I wanted to first touch on is, like I said, I'm Stacey. I'm an editor. I'm a professional editor, full service editor for indie authors who are also, I've also worked with some traditionally published authors, but specifically I work with authors who are looking to get into the industry and become a working author. And my expertise leans towards the international book publishing industry and making sure that they uphold standards that are competitive in the market. And my friend Troy here, I'm going to let him introduce himself and why he also, I want you to kind of like bring in also why you believe you're kind of becoming an expert in this AI world for authors. So take it away, Troy.
All right. Well, I'm Troy Lambert, and I'm the author of over 30 novels, but I'm also I guess I'll say an author educator, a book coach, and an editor as well. And I there are times when I also shepherd people through the publishing process when they're publishing independently. But I do a lot of independent publishing myself, and I study the industry pretty constantly. Part of that is my role as president of Idaho Writers Guild. Part of that is just because I'm kind of in the thick of it with teaching writers about new things that are coming. Because every time I teach them about something, when something new comes along, and that new thing this year is AI. Every year it seems like we have something different, but this year it's AI, and it's AI in a lot of different areas that impact authors. And we have authors that are terrified of AI, and we have authors that are fully embracing AI, and we have authors that are somewhere in the middle, which is kind of where I'd land for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. But I've just rapidly, as soon as AI started coming on the market and there were specific products for writers, I started looking at them and seeing, is this a tool that can help you with your writing? Or is this a distraction? Or is this really bad? Something that's really bad for us and for the industry overall. And just started looking as objectively as I can at all of it.
Cool. So I'm going to kind of segue a little bit because there's a lot of authors. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about AI because it's the hot topic right now. We want to make sure that we're steering authors in the right direction. One of the things that me specifically I'm most concerned with is the ethical dilemma that we come across often in this industry, which is that authors are often presented with all these options, and there are many people out there that will take advantage of you in those various channels. And I'm not sticking specifically with trad publishing here. I'm talking about like indie and hybrid. You can get yourself into some really sticky situations, and AI seems to kind of like muddy the water a little bit because there are copyright issues that people are concerned with or that are not concerned with. And so really fast, what I want to kind of touch on before we dig really deep into this for just a little bit is I want to kind of touch on the different mediums of books that are available to authors to publish in, because I know specifically we want to kind of touch a little bit on audiobooks, but one of the things I want to talk about is there's print, there's digital, and there's audio, right? There's those three different, like, I guess, streams of income you can get on a single book. So AI kind of plays a part in all three of those channels. Am I right?
Yes, it plays a role in all three of those channels, and it plays a role in the publishing process even before that in the actual creation of the text. And that's another interesting area of generative AI. So it potentially impacts every single one of those. This is very similar to the printing press or the ebook revolution that came along, where before we had to have print books, you have to somehow get them into a bookstore, and all of a sudden the Smashwords and Amazon came along, and there were this option for ebooks, which there were before that actually, but they were not at all mainstream. But that's how it became mainstream. Well, when it became mainstream, everybody said, well, the ebook revolution is just going to destroy print books and all this stuff is just going to disappear. And none of that turned out to be true. And this is a very similar, we're on the cusp of a very similar thing where people saying AI is going to replace authors and books are never going to be the same and all this other stuff. And I don't believe that any of that is true. I believe it's going to change the industry in all of those areas, but I don't think there's never going to be a replacement for a human author, not in the near
Right,
future at all.
right. And so, and like you said, as an industry pro, as someone who's worked as an editor with, these a lot of authors of mine are first time authors, or they're just, trying to break into it themselves for the first time. Um, One of the things that, as a book coach and as a publishing coach, that I've noticed is that just reassuring authors as they go forward into this new kind of realm of technology, that they need to not be afraid, and that they need to kind of like just open their mind to the possibilities, that they can embrace certain aspects of this into their own business models, so that they can adapt and go forward and not be left with the dinosaurs. So let's just really quickly talk about, just briefly, how it can work in the manuscript development stage, and then I will give some perspective as far as from my editing perspective, but in a from a technologically advanced author perspective, how is this generative stage, what does that look like for an author?
So for the most part, so we're at first when generative AI first burst on the scene and Chat GPT became more readily available, we saw this proliferation of books that were exclusively created with Chat GPT or with a similar writing type software. That's all, and a lot of it ties back to the same. And I hate calling it artificial intelligence. It's a large language model, is what it
Hmm.
is. It's not intelligence yet, because the thing that obviously that model lacks is intent. It didn't wake up this morning and go, I'm going to write a novel about this. You gave it a prompt and it put some words together. But those books that were generated exclusively with AI are garbage, right? They're garbage because it's like using the predictive text in your phone when you're writing a message and writing all of your text messages using just that. Well, if you're like me, you would end up with some very interesting messages filled with cuss words, right? That would not be great. It's not a great tool of communication, right? Because all that's doing is predicting what words you're going to put next. And a large language model is just trained on more words than just your words, right?
Right.
But it doesn't know what you're trying to say. It's not intelligent. It's predicting and creating generative AI text that way. Okay. So for an author, this is a great way to get ideas and get unstuck if you're stuck somewhere, or get an idea for a character name, or even help you out a little bit with your outline or something like that. But this is not a way to generate content for your book. If you're going to generate content, you are going to have to edit that content heavily right now. Like, it's going to be nothing close to publishable if you generate content like that, whether you're writing fiction, nonfiction, stuff like that. But it is a game changer in that it's like having a subtle secondary writing assistant that you can bounce ideas off of. And sometimes the Chat GPT or whatever will create some interesting prompts that you're like, huh, that's an interesting idea, right? You're going to have to still go write the idea, but it's there. So there's And I mean, there's some possibility that it could create better text going forward, but it's still never going to be 100%. It's not going to stick with your idea. It's not going to understand what you're doing. That's just not the way it's designed. It's not going to do
Right.
that. It's going to take a long time. By the time it does that, we'll be talking about sentient AI, and then we've got other problems, and we're not going to be worrying about whether it's creating books or not. That's
Then
not going
we're
to be our
worried
issue.
about the Terminator, and we're worried about the Matrix, and we're worried
Yeah,
about all kinds of things. So you guys just we're not there yet.
yeah, for sure,
That's
for sure.
awesome.
We're not there
Yeah.
yet.
Well, from a professional aspect, I need to also chime in here a little bit about this. Chat GPT is great, and it's a great tool, and I have some interesting perspective. I have a couple of boys, teenage boys that I'm raising right now that are going through high school, and recently their English teacher had a complete come apart. Like, he was literally ripping his hair out and threatening lives, and saying, accusing the entire class of cheating because somebody used Chat GPT to write a report and everything. And I understand from an academic standpoint that yes, you want these kids to learn to write. This is an important. I mean, we're passionate writers. We want people to learn how to write. We want that's something that I just wish for everybody. But at the same time, the teacher missed out on a huge learning opportunity because he could have actually let these kids understand what ChatGPT actually did wrong for them and how they could have used it in a much more proactive way. And so there's that aspect of this whole outlook that we need to kind of consider. Furthermore, as a professional editor, now this I've been using AI for years. I've been using AI to actually edit books for years. It's one of the ways that I can effectively run through a manuscript and have fewer errors. However, that's not to say that every time I run an AI through my manuscript, am I going to find that the AI is messing up something? Yes, I am, which is where you say that human aspect comes in, that it's very much one of those things where it's a tool and it's not necessarily something that's going to replace the human factor. So, for one more step into that, it also, in generation, you need to understand that there are some copyright aspects that are being actually argued in the Supreme Court as we speak, in terms of who owns the copyright if something is fully generated in ChatGPT or another AI software. You have to understand that the way the copyright laws are written today, it is in the case of a human brain generating something new and putting it into a physical format. That means taking something, an idea out of your mind and putting it onto paper, onto canvas, into musical, into a music composition, whatever you're doing. That is all copyrighted when it's created by a human. And right now the law is set up so that if something is generated by an AI, it's not copyrightable by a human because you don't own
Mhm.
it. So if you're going to try to publish a book that you've generated on an AI software, keep in mind you're going to probably get kicked out of the copyright office. They're not going to copyright that. So you don't own the rights to that. It's just out there, and then you run into issues with maybe some kind of robot crawling around on Amazon and just kicking you off the platform because it decides it doesn't want to put your book out there anymore. And there's nothing you can do to fight that. There's no ownership of that product. So just keep that in mind if you're wanting to really kind of shortcut the generation system. My advice, like Troy said, is to always just use it as a tool. Think of it as a tool. Don't try to replace your work with something that's generated by an AI, because you get down a few sentences in and you're going to see it's really screwed up and you're going to have to fix it. And if you try to give that over to an editor, we're going to spot it right away. We're going to know that there's something really wrong with the text, and we're going to give it back to you and say, you need to fix this. Did you write this?
Yeah.
so,
Well, and one more aspect of the copyright thing is that right now, the way most of the companies are working, they say you don't have to credit the AI with
right.
having created this content. However, that could change at any time. So it
Mhm.
could be that now all of a sudden you have to stay cover created using Midjourney or language created using ChatGPT or pseudo-write or whatever your tool of choice is. And as soon as you introduce them as a secondary author, then becomes the issue of payment.
Mhm.
Like, do you owe them money or royalties if you're using this commercially? Because AI is actually very expensive. That's why some
Mhm.
of these tools are very expensive to use because it's very expensive to generate. It consumes a lot of energy, a lot of computing power. So companies right now like OpenAI is losing money, actively losing money. That's not a business model that they're going to keep forever. At some point, they're going to want their money back, to put it as simply as we can. And when they want their money back, that's not going to be good if you have generated a large portion of your text using AI. The other thing is that AI checkers and AI detectors are actually very crappy right now. It's hard to
Mhm.
tell if something's AI, even for an AI to tell if something's AI. However, I can look at a blog post or a book that you have written and go, this is very mundane. It's very
Mhm.
simply created, which is not what you want from your work anyway. The third aspect of it is that you need to fact check AI. It is not giving you facts. It is spitting out words in a certain order. So if you ask it for sources, it may give you a source of some study that it made up from 1993, and you go look for that on the internet and you can't find it. Well, the reason you can't find it is it doesn't exist. It didn't actually quote a source, right? It just found something on the internet and said, this is a likely place that might have done a report on that, and that's what it enters into there. Your your fact checking is really important. So especially if you're in the nonfiction realm, you're going to get
Mhm.
in trouble really, really fast if you're relying on AI to do that for you.
Right, right. And like I said, as an editor, I can I can easily see when a human wrote something and when a computer wrote something. I can hear, for lack of a better term, the voice of the author when it comes through and when it doesn't. In fact, that's one of the ways I actually caught a plagiarist once. One of my clients was a plagiarist because they had literally written the first chapter, and then the second and third chapter was like not at all, didn't sound like any of their sentence structure was the same, and nothing matched up. So people are gonna know. So you can't submit it for book awards. People are gonna know. They're gonna see right through you. You're probably not gonna hit bestseller list, because people are gonna know. People are going to see what's going on. So if you're trying to legitimize yourself in the market as an expert with a nonfiction book, or if you're trying to create a you're trying to create a platform for yourself, specifically, I'm talking about nonfiction and business people. You're not going to do that by generating AI, without putting your human fingers in the meal. So
Mhm.
please make sure that you listen to us when we tell you to be cautious and be wary and use your human brain
Yes.
when you're going through this process. Okay, so let's
Yeah.
move into the next stage. So I talked a little bit about editing. So let's skip that, because editing, like that, we all know about those editing softwares that are out there. My favorites are Grammarly, ProWriting Aid. I also use Perfectit with Word. Those are my three favorites. And like I said, all three are imperfect, but they are the most perfect in the industry that I've found so far. There might be some others out there that people are that are kind of improving, and when they get good enough that I feel like I can pay for them, and I might add them to my arsenal. But each one of these three platforms will contradict each other. I
Hmm.
noticed that ProWriting Aid will often contradict Grammarly, and vice versa. So just keep in mind that when you're using those things, an editor, a professional editor that's a human, is also going to need to be utilized, because we can discern, and create those style guides that work for your project. So
Hmm.
AIs are not going to be able to create style guides for you. As far as I know, I haven't found one. So
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're not perfect.
They can't. The only thing that an AI does even reasonably well is a proofread.
Right.
which is basically all it's doing. And even then, if you're using a certain style guide, it may not match with what you're doing. So you have to give it
Exactly.
very specific instructions. In other words, you have to know how to tell it to do what you want it to do. And even then, you need to go check
Hmm.
because it's going to make what's interesting is even human proofreaders make mistakes, right?
Right.
But AI proofreaders make mistakes because they don't understand you, and they also understand perfect grammar, which, especially if you're writing fiction and even most of the time in nonfiction, what that does is just edits out your author voice. Your author voice is
Completely.
no longer there. Like the recent ghostwriting project I finished, one of the challenges was going, does this sound when somebody reads this book and then they hear this guy speak, are those two things going to sound the same? If they don't, if I filtered that with my voice or made it into perfect grammar, then his book is no longer his book because it's not his voice.
Right.
That author
Okay.
voice is another thing that AI does not have. And so perfect grammar is not always the right answer. And that's
Right.
one thing that a human editor understands that a an automated editor does not understand. And as of yet, there are none of them that are good enough to discern that and add that personal touch, even on a proofing level. So unless you're
Right.
just proofing something, you want perfect grammar for your English 101 class in college, and so you want to proof it that way, don't rely 100% on AI as a proofer. It's not a good
Right.
idea.
Right. And just I'm just going to put this in here as an aside. It kind of is a little skew, but if you're out there and you're a grammar Nazi and you're trying to like criticize people's writings as you read a book and you're like, well, they shouldn't have put a comma here or they should have put, why'd they capitalize this word? This isn't a capitalization. Consider the fact that there might have been a style guide put in place with that particular editor, and that's because the author wanted it that way, or they were trying to emphasize something a certain way. So, like Troy said, perfect grammar doesn't always apply. And so, proofing is very much an art,
Hmm.
and it's why we get paid for what we do. Okay, moving on to the next stage, let's talk about publishing. And publishing is such a broad term because so many people have different definitions for that. So I'm going to define what I think is publishing. Publishing is taking a manuscript and turning it into a physical format that can be marketed and distributed to an audience. And so that means creating a book or a audible book or a audio book. Or that's the same thing, or a digital book.
Yeah.
So when you create these three different formats, you take this manuscript that you've written, probably in Word or Scrivener or Google Docs, for heaven's sakes. When you want to create these things, you give them over to a formatter who's going to then format this and put it into a nice, beautiful, marketable product that you're going to distribute. That to me is publishing. I'm not talking about distribution. I'm talking about publishing a product. So how does AI play into that?
So there's a couple different ways it plays in. As far as formatting, that
Not
formatting is
really, huh?
actually, I mean, not really. Formatting is a relatively human process, but also we have software
Mhm,
that makes it a relatively simple process. So it's not
mhm,
necessarily AI that is a part of that,
mhm,
but it is, it can potentially be for creating different, perhaps interior graphics or different things like that. But it comes to book covers and
there we
graphics
go, yeah,
and marketing
mhm,
graphics,
mhm,
let me just say this. There is a lot of uncertainty where that market is going to go in a much bigger difference than generative AI as far as text is concerned. Generative AI, as far as text is concerned, is predictive following a model, and it may have been trained on public domain works. It may have been trained on any number of things, right? We don't know exactly where that training came from. But the likelihood is that no matter what you tell a generative AI program, it is not going to spit out one of Hemingway's works and copy it. It's going to be different than that
right,
significantly based on how you prompt, who you are, what you've done, that type of thing. Um, However, art is a different story because generative AI has been trained on art, some of it without the consent of the original artist, which creates an ethical dilemma as a writer. Because you can say, well, an artist, for instance, or for instance, that my writing has been shaped by Stephen King and Dean Koontz and all these other people that I read growing up, right? So technically, I have taken things from them and made that into my own style. And people say, well, that's what I'm doing with art. Because that's how artists are trained. They look at other people's art and they imitate it, and then they modify it and make it their own. And that's where that's where art comes from. It's different though when a machine is trained on it because it tends to imitate. Also, for instance, my friend and I were playing around with an AI and generated a couple different images, and the people had 6 fingers on their hands
Right. The
or
hands are
things
the
like that.
big deal. Yeah.
Because there's an issue, or you'll put in a prompt into a uh, a, a visual art generation AI, and it will come back with something that's just terrible, and you're like, why is that? And the reason is, if you did a Google search for images under that search, you're not going to find really good images because
Right.
it doesn't know what that is. It's just looking for something that it can imitate that it's found off the web. Now, probably the best of these right now is Adobe Firefly.
Mm.
And the reason is it's been trained off Adobe stock images, which the creators are paid for, number one.
Hmm.
So the artists are not getting, basically, they're not being ripped off. And Adobe has also said, as they continue to evolve this AI, they will be paying the creators if their work is used in something, there will be a monetization system that pays those creators. So that's first of all. Second of all, Adobe stock images they're very clean and very specific. What that also means for you as a writer is if you're trying to generate something really odd, a three-headed beast for your sci-fi novel, you're not going to be able to duplicate something that an artist would create
Right.
because images of that don't exist. You're looking for something that's brand new, and AI is not really great at that. So if you're creating a thriller cover, there's a little more straightforward, a little simpler. But if you're trying to create something that's brand new and illustrated cover, you're not going to get exactly what you're looking for. So
Right.
that's the other aspect of it. But the biggest aspect of that right now is that there's a lot of copyright stuff in court about who created the art that this was trained on. And so Midjourney, which is one of the big players in the game, may not survive that. We don't know. But they may not survive that because they have trained their AI off of any publicly available images that they can see on Google, which are some of them are still copyrighted. Even though you can see
Oh,
them on
yeah.
Google, you can't just download that and use it however you want. That's a copyrighted image and you need permission from the creator. And as far as we understand, they do not have permission from those creators to use that material.
Let me
So,
just chime in here for a second, but 90% of what you find on Google is copyrighted. Keep in mind that
mhm.
just because it's on the internet and just because you can see it doesn't mean you can use it. I've run into this several times with authors. Well, I just got that off the internet. Well, that doesn't mean it's free. You really do need to understand that creatives, as a creative, as an author, I'm assuming most people that are listening to this are going to be authors. As an author, you're creating something that you want to be paid for. It doesn't make any sense that it wouldn't be fair to you if somebody grabbed it off the internet and just said, "Well, I found it on the internet, so I'm just going to use it."
I could use it.
Um,
Sure. Why
yeah,
not?
and just not compensate you for it. Like that would be what you would consider for piracy or thievery. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's no different when you find an image or a photograph or, memes kind of like blur the lines off. But there are if you understand that the studios own movies and those movies are then they're copyrighted, like there's just some blurry lines there and because they're used on such a mass distribution kind of thing that they're like that's why they just kind of don't really bother with it. But when you're talking about somebody who I'm just going to use, I'm going to throw a name out there, Ryan Bittner. Hi, Ryan. Who's this amazing monster artist who draws these amazing bits. He's done several covers for me for a few of my authors. You pay Ryan for his work because he is able to do what you said. Like when you want that three-headed monster that nobody else has created, you're gonna find a human that can really dial that in the way you want it to be dialed in. And so yeah, you're gonna pay for that stuff, but just getting it off the internet and oh well, Ryan drew this and he posted this picture on his Instagram. I'm just gonna use that. That's stealing from Ryan. So it's the same thing with anything. So just keep that in mind when you're Google searching. I mean, that's why this is such a controversial subject in terms of AI, because that's what they're doing. They're pulling from these Google searches, basically.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and a meme is something different because a meme is not something
right.
you're making money on. There's a
Right.
difference between commercial use, and I'll just throw this out there. If you're in a different country, the difference between the way you use an image for a book cover in the UK and in the US is completely different.
Completely different.
UK, it's considered editorial, which is a much cheaper way to buy licensing for an image. If it's in
Hmm.
the US, it's considered packaging, which is a much more expensive way of buying license to an image. So if
Hmm.
you don't have the license to that image yourself and it belongs to someone else, trust me, they will come after you. And the
Hmm.
fines for doing that are way more than you will ever make on your book, more than likely. Unless
Right.
you turn into a million seller or something like that, it is not going to happen. Okay.
Right.
So and even if it did, then they're going to tell you to pull that cover, which means revamping everything around your branding. So you need to make sure you own the rights to the images on your cover and any images that you use on the inside of your book.
Right.
This especially applies to nonfiction. Don't go out, even if you are a creator. So I'll give you an example. Okay. I did this book with a publisher for a guy named John Lyon, who is the guy who played Tulin on uh, who played George Tooland on it's a British TV. Now I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, British
Oh,
detective
okay.
show. Right,
Okay.
but so John Lyons wants a particular picture for his cover. It is of John Lyons, but John Lyons does not own the right to that image. A photographer took that image, sold the rights to that image to Getty Images. So for
Mm,
John Lyons to use his own image on his own cover, if it is not a picture he took himself or somebody that he paid took of him and he bought those rights from them, he has to pay Getty Images to use that picture of him on his cover of his book.
right.
Okay. This is the way it works. Like you don't have rights to pictures just because you say, well, I'm in there, or I took that at this event, or whatever. No, I can't
Hmm.
publish a book about Metallica and put the picture I took of them at their concert on the cover of my book.
Right.
It's Metallica's image, right? They own the rights to that. So be very, very careful about that because there's just too many thorny ways that you can go down. So right now, what I would say about image generation AI is, first of all, if you're going to use something and you really want to do it, use Adobe Firefly and be sure you understand the terms and conditions of using that commercially. And also, more than likely, the same as with words, AI is going to spit out something that is not great by itself. You are
Hmm.
going to have to modify and change it to make it actually work for a book cover. Okay,
Right.
so don't do it. As an author, pay attention to think of yourself as a member of the creator community. And you would not
Right.
steal from those people. You don't want them to steal from you. So just don't do it. Just use
Right.
the utmost caution in that particular area.
Be fair to everybody in this community, because that's the only way it's going to survive, as long as we bond together and
Yeah, for
take care
sure.
of each other, for sure.
For sure.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little now. We're going to kind of go from print to into audio, and this is specifically, I mean, this was spurred on by a question that I had earlier this week from a client who wanted to know about narration and generating the files for an audiobook, specifically. And one of the things that was brought up was, how that goes forward. And when I asked Troy, because Troy and I are good friends and we chat back and forth often, I asked Troy, okay, well, who are you using right now? And he's like, well, there's some changes that I've been making in my business model in terms of like author audiobooks. So let's talk a little bit about audio, and how this is being affected by AI as well. And then also we'll go into a much deeper audiobook segment in another episode of
Yes.
Pros Talking Pros. But let's just talk a little bit about AI and how it applies to audiobooks right now.
Okay. So AI is really, really good at imitating voices.
Hmm.
Very, very good at it. And it's very, very good at learning how people talk in certain instances. So AI, if you put the right punctuation in your script, which is different than the punctuation you will put in your book. Okay, so
Hmm.
let me just totally lay that out there though. But so right now you can get AI to narrate a book in a fairly reasonable fashion. You will see a lot of YouTube videos that are narrated by AI,
Oh
and
yeah.
some of them it is difficult to tell. You can usually tell at some point, right?
Hmm.
Um, so what this means to audiobook narrators is that their market has now changed. Now, part of what happened, and there's a big background behind this, is Apple and Spotify and a couple of other companies had kind of these sneaky little clauses that they slipped into their contracts that basically said, by uploading your files to our site, you allow us to train a generative AI using the voice of your narrator. And they sent
Wow.
out these contract tracks, specifically Find a Way, before or just after they were acquired by Spotify. And they sent out this contract change. We're all thinking it's just because they got bought by Spotify. Wrong answer, because many of them, us just signed them relatively blind. We did not go through and read all the terms and conditions. And they said, it's no major changes. So we're all thought, no big deal. And we signed the contracts. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes on one of the bigger author forums and says, hey, man, did you know this is in this contract? And all of us authors went, and narrators went, because
Mm.
we just gave Apple and Spotify permission to train their AI using our narrators' voices without compensation to them.
Wow.
So this is why I'm no longer a fan of Findaway books. I was a really big fan of Findaway for audio when um, when it was a company owned by a person and you could get in touch with that person, and it was really a great option compared to the ACX options, which is the Amazon exclusive audio, which we can talk
Right.
about more in depth some other time.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Right.
so I was a big fan of theirs until I found out about that contract. And then I went, okay, now I'm no longer a fan. Okay, so what does that mean for audio? Well, what it means for narrators is that it's a different game, because you have to be sure that you're careful about where you're putting your voice
Right.
so that it is not being used to train an AI without you being compensated, and somewhat sneakily in Find a Way in that particular scenario with Apple, without really your consent, without
Right.
known consent, right? So that's a part of it. The other part of it, though, is that AI voices are here to stay, whether we like that or not. Regardless of how some of them were trained at this point, they are here to stay. And I believe, and I know you're going to probably contradict me, but I believe that there are a certain number of people that they listen to audiobooks, and when they do it at like 1.5 speed, sometimes 2 times speed, which to me is weird, but all right, you do you, boo, whatever. And
I do it all the time.
actually, I do it with videos sometimes. Like I will listen to it at 1.5 speed, which means that the narrator's voice and the inflections and stuff don't matter nearly as much, because
Oh,
I'm
you
really
think
just
so?
absorbing the words. Oh, I think it's a huge
Okay.
thing, because if I take some of the AI voices and I played it back to you at 1.5 speed and didn't tell you it was an AI voice, at 1.5 speed, you're not going to know the difference.
Yeah,
I would
that would be a fun experiment. We should try that.
we can do a fun experiment with that later. But
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing though. There are people that just consume audiobooks because that's the way they consume stories.
Right.
Love it. because I have 19 audiobooks out there. So I mean, just being straight honest, I have a 20th one is being recorded right now, like this week, right?
That's
Okay.
awesome.
So I'm into the audiobook thing. I'm in 100%. But I do think that there are people that listen to it at a higher speed that are not going to care whether that AI was a narrator or a human.
Okay.
So what's going to emerge, I believe, is a paperback version of audiobooks. And that
Oh,
paperback version will be AI narrated. Because people that don't care whether it's an AI narrator or a human narrator because they're just listening to it to consume it, and they do it at speed, and they listen to it once and then they never listen to it again. It's not like they go back and listen to that same audiobook again, right? So they don't do that. So it doesn't matter. It's like a pulp audiobook, the pulp equivalent of an audiobook. There are, however, some audiobooks that are full on productions that have music, sound effects,
multiple cast.
different
Yeah.
voices, multicast, an
Mm-hmm.
actual script that's
Mm-hmm.
almost done like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Those audiobooks will be more expensive because they
Mm-hmm.
already are. They will
They
be
already
more
are.
expensive. And those people who want that production value of the audiobook will pay more for the
Mm-hmm.
production version. So, as a narrator, what it means is you need to up your game and be careful about where you put your voice. As an author, there's two different things that I would say. And first of all, this is the direction I'm going. You may not love this direction as an author. That is okay. But I believe that one of the ways to keep those voices out of the hands of AI is, first of all, to if you are distributing widely somewhere, to be very careful about where that is distributed and be sure you understand all the terms and conditions. At this point, I would ask if it was a new service, is this voice being used to train AI?
Okay.
Is this audio of my book being used to train AI? And if you can opt out of that consent, opt out of it. Okay, just opt
Good
out of it.
advice.
If you want to train an AI, and I'll talk about that in a minute. If you want to train an AI, you can deliberately do it yourself with your own voice, and that can be very convenient for you for a lot of different reasons, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if that's what you want, you can do that. But I don't want AI taking other people's voices without compensation and using it. So you see what I'm saying with that? The other
Yeah.
thing is sell audio direct from your website. You're going to make more money, number one. And number two, you have this little thing that I tell people about all the time when I'm talking about publishing, and you'll probably hear me throughout this series say it over and over. There's two things that go with it: responsibility and control. And baby, I like control. I mean, I like to control my career. I like to control my words. I like to control where it is. I like to
Mm-hmm.
control that audio, and I like to control how it's distributed so that, first of all, so that everybody gets paid.
Right.
That's an important part to me, but also so that I know where that information is. And one of the ways to do that is to move towards selling things more direct off your website. Readers are becoming more comfortable doing that, buying books, buying audio, stuff like that off of people's websites. You end up making more money, and you control where that information goes.
Right.
So that's my personal, as far as audio is concerned. I mean, the copyright issue is just huge. The compensation issue, those narrators work hard and they deserve to get paid.
There's a
So,
lot of hours in making an audiobook. Lots of hours. The reason they're expensive, guys, is and the reason they're expensive to produce is because there's a lot of hours and a lot of work that goes into that. The editing alone is just
yeah,
monumental.
if you've got
So,
a good narrator, you are paying somewhere between 250 and $500 per finished hour. So if
right.
that audiobook is 2.7 hours long, or even let's say 3 hours long, so the math is easy, it may very well be that that the author that you bought that audiobook from paid $1,500 for that to be produced just for the audio. That doesn't count any distribution, no marketing, nothing like that. So when
Right.
people say audiobooks are expensive, I'm like, yeah, and you know what it takes to create that audiobook and what's behind it. And it's more than
Exactly.
just writing a good story.
And
And the
I
well
don't.
produced ones are even more expensive. So,
Well, yeah, and
yeah,
for entertainment value, that's what you're paying for. We all pay like $8 to $16 to go to a stupid movie, like and there's hundreds of seats in that theater. Think about that's just one theater. That's just one showing, one theater. You got to think about the cost of those movies and how they are produced. And it's the same thing with audiobooks. They're on a much smaller scale, but you've got to really consider what's being involved. So is it lucrative? Yes, it's lucrative. It's not something that I would say, you're gonna. I mean, it's a long game. It's a long game.
Hmm.
We're going to talk about that. It really does depend on your marketing strategy, and you're going to hear us say this throughout the whole series, is that yes, you can make money. You can be a lifelong author that makes this a career, but it does require some legwork and some ground, laying. You
Hmm.
have to go out there and you have to do the work of a business, and that's marketing. Um, so yes, it's lucrative in the long game, and if you do it strategically. Just to go back a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead, and Troy said I may disagree with him a little bit. I don't disagree with what Troy said, but I do want to offer a different perspective. One of the things is that I'm an audiobook consumer. I oftentimes, if I like a book, I will buy it in all different platforms and with different narrators. I'm what you might call a little bit of a snob when it comes to that kind of thing. I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman, and so anytime Neil Gaiman's reading one of his books, I'm like, oh, I got to get that version because I want to hear Neil. I want to hear Neil just lure me off into the world that he's created. It's just one of those things. But again, like Troy said, it's what you're paying for. If Neil Gaiman's version of his book is a little bit more money, I'm gonna probably spend that money. Let's just be honest, because it's Neil Gaiman. Same thing with nonfiction books. Often nonfiction writers will use their own voice to narrate their books because often for consumers, when we pick up a nonfiction, it is so awesome to hear the expert himself or herself talk about that book or about that topic they're writing about. So you can save money in the industry, and there are ways that you can do this, and we'll talk more about this, but just keep in mind that yes, AI has a place to stay. And I love the idea that Troy said about that you said about paperback version being that's going to be the easier way to get things out there, and if people are just consuming, then they're going to be able to consume it easier and faster, and then the author is going to be able to produce that much quicker and also cheaper. But in the long run, keep in mind that production value, especially with fiction books, is that's also here to stay. I have a really good friend that she specifically purchases books for the narrator. So she searches the narrator and what he's done, and then she'll buy a book just because he narrated it. So there are followings of the narrators themselves. So if you are going to produce a book and you pick a popular narrator, consider the fact that there are people also not just following you or your topic or your genre, but they're also following that narrator. So that's why I say there's a lot of cross discovery that can go on in audiobooks. This is something that's strategic and something to consider when you are doing audiobooks. But AI sounds like it's gonna be here for a long way, a long term, and it really is smart for authors to consider embracing that and kind of figuring out how it can work or if it doesn't work with their model.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say
Anything?
one more thing about voice,
Yeah.
about audio, is that there are a few programs where you can AI clone your own voice and train your own voice. Those are very
Yeah.
helpful, not necessarily even for reading an entire audiobook, but for the editing process of an audiobook, because
Mm.
you can replace your mistakes in your voice with your voice correcting the mistake without re-recording that whole section of the audiobook and trying to do
Wow.
it
Yeah, that's a
exactly the
good
way you did
point.
it before. So again, though, what I'm saying by that is AI is again a tool that we use for editing and for helping us do the work that we have to do
Right.
as authors. It is not replacing us in doing the work. It is helping us do the work faster. In that vein, I believe AI is a great tool for writers, and there's all kinds of really cool stuff that you can do with it. But outside of that vein, I think there is a danger zone where authors become so reliant on AI to do some things for them that they lose their own voice and they forget how to do them themselves. And that, I think, is the danger of AI. But I think AI, the future of AI, is something that's here. It's going to be here. Learn to use it to enhance your career and make it better, and make yourself a better writer, and it will serve you extremely well. But use it to replace you or any part of your process, and you're probably going to pay the price for that.
Right, right. Okay, so we've talked about, in this episode, we've talked about pre-production or developing your manuscript. We've talked about a little bit about how it can kind of play into the development of your manuscript into a book or a physical product to market. And then we've specifically audiobooks. That's a really big one. But let's lastly, just really fast, because it doesn't really play too much into this, but AI can play into your marketing and into your post-production and distribution. I'll touch a little bit about this. One of my favorite softwares, and I'm going to consider it AI, but I don't know if it really technically is. I'm Trey, you're the expert, but I love Publisher Rocket. I love this thing like more than my life. It is a huge like tool in my box. I love it to pieces, and the reason I love it is because it helps me generate that metadata and put my clients into the correct keywords and categories that are going to help them get discovered out there in the interwebs. So in terms of generating book blurbs, when we're talking about marketing strategies or campaigns, how can AI be a tool to help with those kinds of things?
So the one way that AI can help you is, and it's being integrated. Well, first of all, it's being integrated into Publisher Rocket and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
And also, there are some great AI keyword search tools. And this is really interesting. So, for those of you that don't know, I also work with authors on SEO, and I'm in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of creating a course about author SEO, and then AI happens, and we have
Mm-hmm.
to go, whoa, okay, now there's a whole new aspect we have to talk about, because AI works really well for figuring out which keywords you should target and rank for, because
Right.
it has a lot of data and information on those things. And even if the data is a little bit old, those things don't change. You know what I mean? Like, the keywords you should rank for are the keywords you should rank for, right?
Right.
They don't change for the most part. So even though that, anyway, that's another topic for another day. But
That's
anyway,
a whole nother
I
day.
could go
Yeah.
down that road. But you can use AI in that aspect. You can also use AI to take your images and create a Facebook ad out of them, for
Mhm.
example, or use parts of your images and create a mini book trailer about your book with them, or any number of other little things that you can do with AI. So there are all kinds of uses that we're seeing in marketing. I think those are just emerging.
Right.
Creating book blurbs and summarizing your book and creating a book blurb for you. If you give the AI enough information, it can actually give you a fairly serviceable book blurb that you will then have to edit
Edit.
as a human being to
Yeah.
make it actually work. But it can give you a good framework for a book
Hmm.
blurb, because you say, write this book blurb. And that's another thing we could talk about another time, which is AI
Yeah.
prompting, which is a whole different skill. But you as a writer should at least have a basic understanding of that and how it works.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to pay somebody to do that for you at some point. But anyway,
Right.
but there are things that you can do post production in marketing that AI can, again, be a tool to help you do better and faster. It's not going to replace, it's being integrated into a lot of advertising programs, Facebook's programs, Google's programs, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Probably eventually the Amazon marketing arena, I would suspect.
Yeah.
Probably
We could
already
talk about that.
Apple.
And yeah.
That's a whole other, it's being integrated into these things, because marketing is something that AI can do a very good job at assisting with, and can take a lot of what I would call the busy work and the mundane work that is just grueling, and take that off your plate, which frees you up more time to be more creative with other parts of your marketing. So, again,
Exactly.
not a replacement for you, but AI can be a great tool for marketing.
Right. Right. Perfect. And like I said, in distribution and getting yourself set up so that you can even be discovered, you have to know how algorithms work, and those are constantly being changed. So AI is a lot of times staying up on that a little bit faster and quicker than you can. This industry turns on a dime and things change drastically often. And I can't be enough of an advocate for people like Troy and myself who are out there in the industry pounding the pavement every single day. Troy, I know you published books by the amazing amounts yearly. I'm up to about 20 to 30 books a year right now publishing, which means I'm in that software that publishes those books often, like daily.
Hmm.
And what that means for you as an author is when you are publishing one book a year, or maybe one book every other year, or you haven't published for 5 years and you think you got it because 5 years ago you published, just keep in mind that the industry, like just last year, I had to make 5 major iterations to my own business just because of things that got tweaked.
Yep.
So just keep in mind that professionals that are in the business often active, not just your next door neighbor who's an English professor who published a book 10 years ago. Like, keep in mind that people that are actively in this business are going to be your best team members. They're going to be your best advocates and best I guess support as you go forward in this business, whether you go indie, traditional, or self. And I make a lineation between indie and self quite a bit. But
Yes, me too.
what
But
I
that's
really
another
want you to,
topic.
yeah, that's another, we'll hit on that another time. But we want you to know that it's encouraged to find team members to fill holes that you yourself might not be able to accomplish or know um, or find out about. You don't want to spend the years that we spent going down rabbit holes to figure this stuff out. So always find a professional that you can trust and that you can work well with to help you through this process. So that's our first Troy Stacey Pros Talking Pros. Troy, do you have anything else you'd like to add? Little word of wisdom before we go on?
I would just say the same thing that you said and echo the fact that you need a team. I
Mhm.
need a team. Every one
I
of
need
us
a
needs a
team.
team
Yeah.
around us. We are not we are not solos. I know a lot about the publishing industry, but also I know enough to know when it's better for me to hand it off to someone else that's a professional and let them help me with that process. And
Amen.
sometimes it's not even necessarily something I can't do; it's something that they can do better than I can. And so
Exactly.
there's just times when you're going to need to know that. So as you listen to us talk through these episodes, understand this is not just our knowledge, but it's coming from a whole host of people that we've interacted with and that we've worked with. Because, as Stacey said, this industry is changing on a dime all the time. And AI is just one of the aspects that's changing right in front of our eyes this year.
Right, right, exactly. And this time next year, we could be having a whole nother episode about how, well, remember that episode back in 2023? Ignore it, trash it. Everything's changed. But yeah, it happens often. So, like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and put my website up there. It's editsbystacey.com. You can contact me if you want to talk. I offer a free consultation for anybody who's interested in figuring out their publishing path and whether or not they're on the right path or they need to change or shift. And then again, I'm a full service editor. Troy, what's your website? What can they expect from you?
And TroyLambertWrites.com. I also edit, but I edit kind of for a limited number of people at this point
No?
because I and a specific genres. So if you're interested, you can contact me. If I don't edit your genre or something, I will help you find someone who does.
Right.
Because that's
Mhm.
part of what I do as well. But I also act as a book coach, which basically means that I can teach you how to get your book idea off the ground and actually get writing and producing that book. And I can be an annoying and bug you as much as you would like me to bug you. But I love doing that because I love seeing authors succeed. And I tend to be a kind of a plot doctor as well. If you've got a problem with your plot, I can help you fix it. I can promise you
Totally. Yeah.
I will help you find a
That
way.
is
But anyway, So
Yeah,
yeah,
that is awesome.
TroyLambertWrites.com. There's two places there you can enter as a reader, enter as an author. You enter as an author, you're going to see all my author stuff, and you can actually get a free book if you sign up for my email list. So
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And we will, I don't know, we should come up with a schedule. Like, how often should we do these
uh,
bad boys?
yeah, we
Once
should
a
do
month?
this like once a month, once every couple of weeks. We should do it once every couple of weeks. Eventually, we might get
Okay.
organized and do them. The truth is, we could do these every week and have plenty to say. But Stacey and I happen to be also two of the busiest people on the planet, so that might be challenging for us to
Yeah,
actually commit to.
that's
So
going to be very challenging.
every
Every
couple of
couple
weeks
weeks.
is probably
Okay.
good. But just
Twice a
hey,
month. We'll
subscribe to the channel, hit the
subscribe.
notification bell, and when something new is there, you'll see it.
We'll be sure that you get it. Awesome. All right, Trey. Well, it was great talking to you today, and we'll talk again soon.